Outside Tamashii Reviews, Giant Monster Mania, we are taking a look at the Bandai Tamashii Nation's SH Monsterarts Shin Godzilla figure. This is kind of an interesting release in the Monsterarts line because with this release it was Japanese only. So far there is no confirmation of this coming to the US. And it seems like this figure is sold out in a lot of places online. So I'm very happy I got my pre-order in nice and early on this guy. As with any new Godzilla movie, I was pretty hyped both to see the movie, which I saw a couple months ago, when it got its limited theatrical run, and I was equally excited to get my hands on this figure that I'd pre-ordered before I even saw the film. So let's go ahead and take a closer look. And I know the look of Shin Godzilla has been very polarizing. Some parts of it do look quite silly, but this figure really captured things I really enjoy about the character and the design of this version of Godzilla. One thing I will say throughout this entire figure is that the paint job is very, very nicely done. I keep thinking there's translucent bits in the plastic here, but I think it's actually that they painted the entire figure this deep reddish purple color and then did all the dark colors as dry brushing over top of it. That kind of leads to the figure looking like it has a purpley red glow coming from underneath the skin, which is how it looks in the movie. So I'm really happy that they did it that way. Here on the face, we do get the kind of mushroom cloud shaped head. We get the very tiny eyes with a little pupil in there, which is accurate to the film. We get some very, very jagged teeth, not just coming out of the gum line, but some of them kind of jutting out at different angles because, well, this Godzilla's got horrible, horrible teeth. They're kind of a nice bone yellow color. And then inside the mouth, you have a lot of great detail, very shiny in there, showing off the inside of his mouth. You have the jowls here on the side as well. One thing I will say about this mouth that I'm not quite as happy with is I was really hoping they would give us an added articulation point so we could split the jaw apart at the bottom to replicate the beam effect. And I'm kind of hoping we will get a Spitfire version of this down the line or something, because I'd love to see this bottom jaw retooled to match that look of this Godzilla. Going down the neck, there's some great sculpting, all the different wrinkles and strange shapes in there. The dorsal fins start very, very high up on the back of the head and then slowly get bigger and darker as they go down the back. And you can see here they are very jagged, but they're pretty regularly shaped. They all kind of have the same basic pattern to them. And it matches a very classic Godzilla mold where there's very large spines down the center, then a row flanking those, and then an even smaller row on the side of that. And then it gets really, really tight here to the body with kind of a pseudo ridge going on the side. In the middle here, we do see a lot of the brightest red on this figure. There's very little black dry brushing or anything in this middle section, and I still think it looks pretty cool. Looking down the front of the figure, we have a very prominent breastbone here on this Godzilla. It kind of comes out to a point. We almost have this webbing kind of texture going across it, which I thought was a really cool touch on this design. And we have his very stumpy, very tiny hands. They're basically useless here, but they kind of have this bent up pose to them, so you can get that kind of weird hands up design that they had this Godzilla with most of the time in the film. The skin has a really cool rough texture. No section on this figure is smooth at all. It's all this kind of keloid scar kind of texture throughout the entire thing, and you can see bits of that red poking through the paint at all different points on this figure. The nails are also very similar bone yellow to the teeth. Going further down the figure, we have the very wide hips, the very beefy pelvis on this thing. This is a Godzilla that carries most of its weight lower down on the body, so it makes sense the figure just balloons at this section. Then we have the very large upper thighs on this, the kind of crusty looking knee, and then the little back bent legs here. The toenails are just wicked looking, very large, sharp, and curved. The great yellow paint job to them with some black dry brushing over top to make them look dirty. And there's even some like extra little claws poking out at different points on the feet, giving it more of that mutated look. The feet are smooth on the bottom where the copyright info is, no texture down there. But there is a good texture going down the bottom of the figure into the tail, which kind of has still a rough texture, but a little more smooth than most of the rest of the figure. On the top of the tail, we slowly graduate from the spines getting smaller and smaller. Then it kind of gets a little flat here and then comes back out with these sharp spikes instead of more fins. It's a very unique detail on Shin Godzilla. It's kind of strange to me, but I like it as something different. And then this has to be the longest tail in Monsterarts history. I thought Space Godzilla had a long tail, but this guy takes the cake. And then here at the very end, we get the really strange tail tip Kind of looks like raw meat in there. You can see things there at the end that may or may not be things that are spoilers, and I guess since this movie only got a limited release, I won't go into too much detail about what this tail looks like. Yeah, it definitely has all the detail I'd expect it to have, let's just say that. Shin Godzilla has a decent range of articulation. The jaw is kind of wonky because you can open the upper jaw and it goes up a pretty good amount. It does expose that inner mouth section as it goes up, and then the lower jaw can come down even further, but you kind of get a disconnect with this membrane here if you go down too far. So the mouth only has really a certain extent to which it can open without looking super goofy. And also the way this head's constructed means there is no real head joint here at the top section. You have to go down to the individual neck sections. We have this one on a ball joint here below it, and then an even lower ball joint piece where it connects to the body. And you do get a pretty good range of motion out of those. You can move pretty far down, a little bit up, also side to side, and rotation is a little limited. We also do get two ball joints here at the waist, so you can go pretty far forward, and you can kind of move this inner piece up a little bit to kind of bridge that gap somewhat. One thing I do like is they did sculpt and paint all inside of that gap area, so there's no just blank space when Shin Godzilla leans forward. There's detail all the way through. You can also rotate here at the waist as well as tilt. The arms are a little goofy. We have a ball joint here at the shoulder that will go kind of up and down, forward and back, and you could also rotate it a little bit. Then we have rotation. I guess this is actually the shoulder in here, and it will go forward and back as well as out to the side. We get a hinge there at the elbow, and you could also rotate. And then we have a very simple ball joint there at the wrist. Doesn't have a whole lot of motion, but this Godzilla doesn't really use his hands much, so it doesn't matter too much. You can also rotate there. The legs will go forward, a little bit back. They're kind of limited by the V shape of the crotch here, so you can't really go straight forward, but it's kind of extreme for this anyway. You can also go really far out to the side, which is nice. We have a pretty nice double jointed knee there. We have the floating kneecap to kind of hide any joints in there. We have the ankle here at the back on a nice ball joint. You can get a good range of motion out of that as well. And then this tail is full of ball joints as per usual with Monsterarts figures. I do find mine tends to pop apart both at the body here and then about midway down the tail. Just seems to be really easy to pop it into different sections. So you do have to be a little careful when posing it, but it's a higher end figure, so it's not really meant to be like played with roughly or anything. But each of these sections will bend really well. They hold their position pretty damn well. They will also rotate a little bit, not much because of the shape of the tail overall, but you can rotate this end section if you want to get it into different poses for shooting off lasers and things. For a size comparison, here's the Monsterarts next to the Bandai release that I picked up a few months ago. It is interesting to note the kind of more plain, straightforward paint style on the Bandai piece, but I do like both for different reasons, and the Bandai one definitely doesn't take up nearly as much shelf space. You can't really see from this picture, but the tail on the Monsterarts version is much, much longer. And here he is next to the NECA GMK, and you can see even though NECA figures usually tend to be bigger than Monsterarts, this guy is completely dwarfed by the Shin Godzilla. I'm not entirely sure if Shin Godzilla is truly in scale with other previous releases in the Monsterarts line, or if this isn't that new scale with the Godzilla vs. Biollante figure that just recently came out, but I believe since it is a very tall looking version of Godzilla that it may be intended to be in the old scale of Monsterarts. And if I'm going to talk about Monsterarts, might as well bring one in. Here's the 2014 Godzilla, so no longer our newest version of Godzilla. And yeah, Shin Godzilla just absolutely dwarfs this guy. It's just a gigantic figure in the line. So I absolutely love this release. I feel like SH Monsterarts is kind of back. Last year was a bit of a break for the line, and this year, while we haven't gotten an extreme amount of figures, we've gotten enough that I feel like the line is actually happening as opposed to 2015 where it felt like the line might be completely over. I really like the design of Shin Godzilla, so that definitely helps in me enjoying this figure. I know there's a lot of people that really don't like this design of Godzilla, so they probably won't enjoy this figure at all. The scale is the only thing that really bugs me, but I think he's going to look fine on the shelf next to my other figures. But besides that, I think the overall execution of this figure is great. The sculpting is what you've come to expect with Monsterarts, very high end. The paint I absolutely love on this figure. I've heard some people don't enjoy it, but I'm really digging it. And the articulation's good for what this figure will allow. I'm sure some people might not be happy if their tail pops apart like mine does, but for a tail that long and that bulky and heavy, I'm not surprised that it does it and it just pops right back together. It's definitely not nearly as frustrating as like King Ghidorah's heads or anything like that. It's very easy to keep in place and pretty darn easy to pose. I do wish that this thing would have come with some beam effects. I'm really hoping we do get a Spitfire version down the line because I'd love to have one with translucent purple plastic and a true beam effect for his mouth. Right now I'm using the Rodan Uranium Heat Beam for his breath effect, and the tail beam is from the Figurize Frieza model kit, and they're both roughly the same color, even though I think they need to be a little more purple to really be correct for Shin Godzilla. It works alright. So a very, very strong recommend for this piece. I do also have that new Godzilla vs. Biollante Godzilla figure on order. Should be here sometime in the next week, so I'll be reviewing that very soon as well. And I just ordered the Shin Godzilla Evolution set that's coming out. I believe that's also a Bandai web exclusive, and that will have the earlier two forms of Shin Godzilla. So I'm excited to get my hands on those and review them as well. Make sure you like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Follow me on Facebook, link below. Also check me out on Instagram, username Outside the Box Reviews. And until next time, this is Outside the Box Reviews, Giant Monster Mania. Stay tuned for more to come.